All right, now is the time in the service where I invite you to just sit upright and expand your chest. And just to begin to take those deep cleansing breaths. With each breath, just furthering, coming into this relaxed state. Letting the chair support you. Feeling the earth beneath your feet. Just beginning to settle into the core of your body. And with each cleansing breath, I invite you to move into that inner spaciousness, using the intention that you've set for your day. Perhaps the intention is of love, one of peace, or maybe one of more understanding. I invite you to just settle into that and move into that space. Feeling your breath begin to expand within. And giving that breath its full freedom, just simply allowing it to move throughout the body. And once you really begin to feel that centerness and that stillness, riding the waves of each breath, gently begin to bring your awareness to your heart center. Simply turning your focus to your heart while still feeling the pulsation of each and every breath. Now begin to imagine a brilliant light within your heart. And with each breath, begin to feel and allow this light to expand. Growing ever outwardly through the body and beyond. Feeling and allowing your heart to become more spacious. And as we move into the silence, know that you are safe and you are always protected by this light. And just allow the energy of your heart center to become even more full, more wide, and more vast as we move into the silence. As you begin to bring your awareness back into this room and in this moment, we know that the energy that resides within your heart is a part of the supreme energy that breathes and weaves into this creation, all that is. Feel yourself connecting to that bigger energy. This grand energy that is pure light and pure love. Allowing your awareness to reach effortlessly outward to touch the whole of this universe. And as you feel ready, begin to bring the focus of your heart light back to surround your body. Focusing on a safe and expanded feeling of your heart in your chest. Remembering that you are always connected to that vast and spacious consciousness that you just touched with your own awareness. Begin to feel your individual sense of self, your energy bright and yet contained within your own field and space. Inviting this lightness to remain with you. And when you feel ready to move out of the meditation, just pause for a few breaths and just breathe. And in gratitude, namaste. Birthday, and thank you for the music. So today we enter week 2 of our study by Parker J. Palmer, Healing the Heart of Democracy. And if you attended one of our discussion groups last week, I hope yours was enjoyable as mine was, because we had some really good conversation around the book, and it was very enlightening for all of us. So I thank you to my group. I really enjoyed it. Now, the first thing I want to ask is, who left the freezer open? Because it's a little cold for me now in Wisconsin. See, you all laugh because this is your fall. This is a Texas winter, okay? So I was telling Sandra this morning to just let me live in my bubble of ignorance and pretend like this is as cold as it's going to get. Quit shaking your head over there, Lori. But I did venture out on Friday for a little while as this was coming in and took my dogs to the dog park to kind of let them run around. One of them was shivering, so even she's not used to the cold weather. But while I was sitting there at the dog park, I was watching the dogs and how they just interact with each other. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, there is really probably a lot that we can learn from dogs. They don't know each other. They go up, kind of sniff. Hey, it's their way of shaking hands, get to know each other. But they don't act, they don't seem to care what color fur another dog has. They don't go up and say, hey, what do your human parents do for a living? What kind of house you live in? Where were you born? They don't say any of that stuff. They just kind of go up and sniff, and next thing you know, they're just frolicking and playing and acting like they've known each other forever, building their own little communities. And it's like they've been friends forever. Now, Mr. Palmer, he starts talking about community a little bit early on in the second chapter of the book. And he talks about it, he approaches it first by using the word citizenship. And he describes it, he says citizenship as a way of being in the world. And how he thinks of citizenship as a vast community of beings that we all depend on for the essentials that we could never provide for ourselves. Now, he mentions citizenship and community being much more than just the roles we play. And I'll get into that a little bit more as I talk this morning. But to me, I see this as being something much larger than a political party we might belong to, being a citizen of a specific country, whether it's this one or another one, and other things we might use to describe ourselves on a daily basis, like maybe our job titles or being from a specific state, saying I'm a Texan or whatever. Don't hold that against me. I hear some giggles. But I see community as being a part of what Mr. Palmer states as the common good. Coming together as a community for the common good is not where we only depend on others for certain essentials, but we also provide them for other people. It's kind of a give and take situation. And when it meets the common good, it's not good just for me, but for those around me as well. And I feel one of the biggest ways we can do this is through the act of love. Now, first, however, we must understand that there are differences between different types of love. And I'm sure we all know that, but I want to go into that a little bit more. The ones I want to address today are two loves, human love and divine love. And our Unity co-founder, Charles Fillmore, helps us to make the distinction between the two of those. He states, the difference between divine love and human love is that divine love is broad and unlimited, a universal and a harmonizing power. Whereas human love is based more on the personality, things that can change, and tends to sometimes be a little selfish and lawless and even sometimes fickle. So it would seem that we need to learn more about this divine love, right? I mean, that sounds like some good stuff. Tell me more. Tell me how I can use that and implement that. Especially when we are in this human experience, not alone, but with communities of other people. Now, if you're like me, you've probably dreamed at one point or the other of moving to a remote cabin in the woods somewhere where you can be alone. Or maybe it's a beach, whichever you prefer, snow, sun, whatever. But the fact of the matter is that it's probably not going to happen, and if it does, it's going to be for a short while. And we're going to have to return back into communities of living with other people. And it tends to work so much better when we can do that in divine love, right? And this type of love is contagious. Divine love really is contagious. When we practice it and we really feel it and know that it's not just a huge part of what we share, but it's a huge part of what we are, it radiates. And when it does, it feeds into this collective consciousness and it spreads. It's a good thing to be contagious. But where does this divine love originate? It originates right here in the heart. Now, Mr. Palmer describes the heart as the integrative core of all the human faculties. Mr. Charles Fillmore also referred to the heart in the same manner when he mentioned that the faculties of love are centered where? In the heart, yes. Now, if you've been around Unity long enough, or you stick around Unity long enough, you're going to hear about the heart. We're a lovey-dovey bunch, and we like to talk about love, and we like to talk about the heart. So you're going to hear about the heart. But in fact, love is one of the Unity 12 powers. Again, centered in the heart, in that heart space. So as we move through this day and this week, and just as we progress through this study, and even I hope you'll carry it beyond, I invite you to turn your attention to your heart space. that place where love is always centered. Now, it's been said that when Jesus prayed the prayer of atonement, he was calling attention to the ultimate activity of love, that spiritual oneness that pervades everything in the universe. It always goes back to love. And this activity that pervades everything in the universe is found again in the heart. You see a theme developing here. But all of that being said, talking about this good with this love with the heart, I'm now going to throw a wrench into it because I like to do that. I like to make us all think. But Mr. Palmer says, I believe in the power of the human heart to do evil as well as good. Wait a minute. Evil? Did he just mention evil in a unity church? I did, but bear with me because we're going to talk about this. So let's think about it for a moment. What exactly is evil, and does unity even believe in such a thing? And if it were to exist, can it even reside in the same place as love? Now, here at Unity, we believe that there is one presence and one power in the universe, which is God, the good, and omnipotence. Knowing that, however, do we close our eyes, kind of like the monkeys, close your eyes and your ears and all that? Do we plug up our ears, close our eyes, and stomp our feet and pretend that evil doesn't exist, at least in some form? But let's approach it from a unity perspective so we can all breathe. Mr. Fillmore also refers to something called duality within our human experience. And that makes my mind go back to those childhood cartoons where there's somebody sitting there and they're conflicted about this decision. And there's an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other, and the angel's like, no, you need to go this way. And the devil's like, no, you need to go that way. And the person's kind of conflicted. Now, Mr. Fillmore went on to state that evil isn't something from a being or a deity called the devil. Something or someone that's just completely separated from God. It is instead nothing more than an ignorance. An ignorance from our true spiritual identity. Now, thinking about evil in that way, that's a little bit easier to swallow because that means that we can change it. And I will say that duality is something we are all going to experience. As long as you are in your body, in this human experience, it's going to come. It's going to happen. But that's okay. That's part of this human experience. Now, Mr. Palmer mentions that the heart leads some to become terrorists and others to serve the hungry and the homeless. Now, he refers to Mr. President Abraham Lincoln and about his faith in what Mr. Lincoln referred to as the better angels of our nature. But Lincoln was also aware of something he called the shadowy companions of those angels. So what exactly does he mean about shadowy companions, and what does it have to do with evil? To understand this, we must refer back to Mr. Fillmore's mention of the word duality. And our book mentions about how the human psyche reflects an experience that every human being knows intuitively. One of division and conflict, brokenness and harmony, suffering and rewards, and a journey and its challenges. Now, some of those seem to be a little bit paradoxical in nature, don't they? Just completely opposites. On one hand, we've got something that can seemingly destroy, and on the other, we've got this thing that can go out and make things whole. Duality enters the picture when we kind of get stuck in that human side of thinking. That human thinking of this is all that there is, what we can see right here in front of us with our human eyes. And this is where ego, something called the ego, lives and thrives because it gains power here. And there's one thing I want to say about the ego. It does not like to be left alone. It doesn't like to be ignored, and it doesn't like to be discarded like a plastic bag out flapping in the wind. It doesn't enjoy that. It loves to be in full control of our faculties. And it loves to fight even harder when it feels like you're trying to silence it or threaten it in any way. It loves for us to believe that we're separate from this God source, that we're something just completely separated from that universal connection. And it likes for us to believe that we are this human body and that we are only that, and that our world is only that we can perceive with our five senses. And when we begin to truly believe that, and when we begin to truly believe what ego is telling us, we begin to kind of fall prey into that dualistic belief system. Now, coming from that place of duality also begins to put barriers in our paths. Those barriers can eventually start to block out the light, leaving us on a path that feels a little dark. And when this occurs, we can begin to kind of start turning our spiritual sight off temporarily. And I say temporarily because if you can flip that switch off, you can turn around and you can flip it back on. And another thing about ego, it is also never going to completely go away. It is a part of this human experience, and it's going to remain there. It's going to be around as long as we have breath in our bodies. However, and you knew there was going to be a however, we can learn to silence it a little bit by placing it in a corner and challenging it to a game of the quiet game. Remember that when you were a kid? You're like, oh man, that game is so much fun. I'm going to be quiet the longest. And looking back as an adult, that was an ingenious game for teachers and parents and guardians to create. Kids love it, and it's a way to get a little bit of silence. But like with kids, that quiet game is only going to last for so long because kids are eventually going to catch on. They're going to want to talk, and so is the ego. But how do we stand steadfast within our truth and steadfast in that divine love when we start to hear the whisperings of ego again? Now, in the book, in chapter 2, Mr. Pullman mentions the 5 habits of the heart. And when viewed through a spiritual lens, they can offer an excellent roadmap on what it takes to truly stay within that place of divine love. Now, I'm probably today only going to scratch the surface on each one of these, but don't worry about that because we're going to be delving into them a little bit more as we go through this study. So the first one he mentions is the fact that we must understand that we are all in this together. Now, thinking back to school and grade school, perhaps one of the things we first learned about the Constitution when we started repeating it or in history or whatever, was the term, we the people. Now, I don't need to give everybody a history lesson in here. We all know that the Constitution was written in a time that was much different than our own. The nation was still coming together, and it was in this huge process of birth, going through the pains of birth and just kind of starting to come together. But even then, they knew the significance on what it meant for people to come together as a community, we the people. That means all of us. They knew the significance of community and how important it was for us all just to band together and to realize that we are truly in this together, this experience. And as we know, that extends beyond the borders of this nation. It extends beyond to a place where outer appearances just don't matter and are just simply irrelevant. Now, I recently met a man who'd lived in England a number of years, and he and I were discussing this book, and he brought up a good point to me when he mentioned that he feels we often tend to live in our own bubbles. And whatever it is that's in our own little bubble becomes our reality. So I invite you to allow your bubble to extend just beyond yourself. Allow others inside of it, and do realize that we truly are all in this together. Now, the second habit of the heart that Mr. Pullman mentions is that we must develop an appreciation of the value of otherness. He also mentions the good news is that us and them does not have to mean us versus them. Now, if you heard my talk last week, I mentioned, and you've probably heard this in Unity before, but I mentioned that there really is no them versus us. There really, truly is only us in the Spirit. Now, Mr. Palmer's statement seems to kind of contradict that at first glance, but does it really? Maybe not really if you begin to think about it. Now, here at Unity, we teach that we're all one in spirit. We might look a little different and act a little different and come from different experiences, but we're all one in spirit. And we can still recognize that we're one in spirit, but still accept our differences in this human experience. So remember the common good that I mentioned earlier. Those differences can come together to create this common good. Our different skills, our different languages, our different experiences, all of it can positively serve the common good if we will allow it to do so. Our next habit of the heart is that we must cultivate the ability to hold tension in life-giving ways. Now, tension is one of those things, I doubt if I ask anybody in this room, do you like tension? No. It's one of those things that probably most of us just absolutely do not care for. It can cause our bodies to feel really tight. It can cause emotional stress. It can sometimes cause the manifestation of a physical illness. It just doesn't feel good. And I would imagine that most of us strive to avoid it at all costs. And while you can definitely attempt to avoid it at all costs, is that always the best way to deal with tension? Just kind of shove it in a corner and act like it doesn't exist? Probably not. Now, chapter 1 of the book, going back just a little bit, mentions President Abraham Lincoln again and how he refused to split the North and the South during the time into the good guys and the bad guys. He refused to do that. Instead, he appealed for a malice toward none and a charity for all approach. He seemed, even in his time, to have a really good understanding of what it meant to really embrace tension in such a way that it opens our hearts to each other, despite how uncomfortable it may feel in the moment, or despite how chaotic it may feel from time to time. And I think I recently mentioned it, and we brought it up in my discussion group last week, about how we must learn to feel comfortable within the uncomfortable. When we agree to do this, it also allows us to ask ourselves questions. Questions such as, why is it that I am uncomfortable in this situation? What might this situation be trying to teach me? And where might this tension in this situation help me to be able to evolve more on a spiritual level? And asking yourself these questions when you feel that tension are often a great way to provide some clarity and to help us maybe understand why it is that we're feeling that tension in the first place, ultimately helping us to be able to work through that tension in creative ways. The fourth habit of the heart he mentions is that we must generate a sense of personal voice and agency. So I want to ask a question in here, and it's not going to apply to you extroverts in the room, so y'all just keep quiet. But how many people sometimes or have felt at times afraid to speak up in class or a work meeting or some other situation, even though perhaps you knew you had the right answer or you knew that you had something valuable to contribute? I mean, maybe it was shyness. It might have been just being a little shy at first. But could it have also maybe stemmed from a lack of confidence? Or from feeling as if you couldn't or wouldn't be able to make a difference? But maybe think about it this way. What if the answer you hold is perhaps exactly the answer that everybody is looking for? What if your answer leads to a more efficient process or maybe a better way of doing things? We won't know unless you give us your voice. There's probably no way to know if you had the right answer unless you use your voice. We do that by knowing that we have the power inside of each one of us. Inside of that divine love resides the power to use our voice and to use it for the common good. Now, I'd wanted to be a minister for several years before I actually went to ministerial school. But I didn't because I was terrified of public speaking. Absolutely terrified. Like most people, my palms would start sweating. I'd have to wear really baggy pants because my knees would shake. And my mouth would get so dry that I felt like I could barely talk. And it felt like somebody had shoved cotton balls into the back of my mouth, just absorbing every bit of moisture. But I'd sit in the congregations at churches, and I'd go attend other spiritual talks, and I'd witness transformation in people's lives that were sitting out in congregations or the audience with me. And I'd often wish that I was the one up there being able to help contribute to that transformation. But I lacked confidence in my own voice. And I lacked confidence in my power to make a difference. So the night before my wedding, as I was waiting for the time to go out there and get the ceremony started, I was chatting with my First Unity minister who was going to be facilitating the ceremony. But I told him, I said, I'd love to be a Unity minister. And he goes, well, why don't you? And I said, well, I'm afraid of public speaking. I'm afraid I'm going to get up there and just fall or pass out or something. But he looks at me and he tells me, he's like, most people want for you to succeed. That's just the way it is. People want you to succeed. And he goes on to tell me, he goes, I can't tell you how many times I've walked away from my notes, completely forgot what I wanted to say, and had somebody from the congregation run up, grab me my notes, and hand them to me. He said, people want you to succeed. So when we trust ourselves and our communities enough to help us when we need it, then we will know the satisfaction that our own contributions can bring to make positive change in this world. And finally, our fifth habit of the heart, we must strengthen our capacity to create community. So with this one, I love history. I study history. I love it. So the first thing that came from me to mind was something historical. And this was something that took place in 1965, and it was something I'm sure you've heard about. And I lived in Alabama for a short time. But that was from the march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. This group, this community of protesters set out to march 54 miles to ensure that African Americans were able to register to vote. And it doesn't just have to be the march from Selma. Take any other event of historical significance, something that has brought huge change. Do you think it would have had the same effect if it had only been one person working alone? I mean, sure, maybe it took one person to think about it, but would it have been the same if that one person had worked alone without community? Even brave souls such as Rosa Parks were able to accomplish what they accomplished because enough people in that community witnessed her act of bravery and finally stood up and said, enough. That enough was what drove change. Coming from a place of love, that enough was what drove change. Caring for other people and saying enough. And it's what continues to drive our change today. It's when we band together in community with love that we band together for the common good. It's when we can approach citizenship not as a nationality, but as citizens in spirit together, here in this human experience. A citizen in helping others and allowing others to help us. Because we really are in this together, aren't we? Namaste.